Thank you very much. Colleagues, let me just quickly introduce myself. As the chair has, first of all, thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. So I would first love by starting to introduce myself. I'm Thapelo Mokole. I'm a PhD researcher from the University of South Africa, in South Africa. I'm not alone, but in absentia, I have my supervisor, primary supervisor, Professor Marcia Mkansi, who is also based in Cape Town, South Africa. I am more based in the more, Johannesburg side, so I'm currently what should we call it? Streaming rather or connecting directly from Johannesburg, South Africa. We are 2 hours away from one another, but in her absentia, I will continue with the presentation and see where it basically pans out. So South Africa now is currently 1 a.m. in the morning. So if my voice is a bit rough, apologies, colleagues. I will try my level best to try and convey the message as much as I possibly can. Yeah, so as the chair has basically introduced us, so essentially what we're trying to develop is essentially a system or rather enhancing a known system, which was inserted from my master's thesis called the Academic Rating Index, which essentially started off as a rating tool. So it basically was a rating tool that we developed as part of my master's thesis from the University of South Africa in the computing department and ComSci as well, to be able to derive a sentiment between a student and their supervisor. So basically what we have seen is that specifically in the South African region, we had high number of enrollment rates. However, the output ratio was not matching the number of intakes that the universities were basically running through. So, in an attempt to try and understand the study, we developed the academic rating index, which is basically a system that we used to derive a sentiment between a student and their supervisor, with our primary focus being on postgraduate students. So we wanted to understand what could have been the issue that is basically causing such low output rates, and as a result, we were able to design and deploy this particular tool. So a couple of years later, we then began to pivot, more especially not just for it to be what you would call it as not just for it to be a rating tool, so as to speak, but also we wanted to design what we refer to as a learning analytics application, which basically encompasses all the aspects of learning, and we're then able to amalgamate our resources and our research capabilities into ensuring that we can, to some extent, try to prove the theory that we had specifically from our master's level. So if I can just quickly read for you the topic, essentially, we are trying to enhance the academic rating index by introducing or via a cross-platform data integration where we'll be consolidating supervisors' research output, records, and expertise into a centralized search and ranking engine. So what that basically means, colleagues, is that building on the already existing work, which was a rating tool specifically for supervisors on a postgraduate level. We are trying to build a system where we are able to amalgamate all the supervisors' academic history and expertise into a singular database where students can basically come and source their information and be linked algorithmically to supervisors who match their expertise and their interests and field or the research interests, so that the relationship can become less strenuous. So part of the reasons that we saw in the study that we saw is that the supervisor and student matching was quite erroneous, and it was in more often than not sucked, and quite a number of challenges arose out of that. As a result, we decided to then build this system where it would source the supervisor's data from various academic sites and be able to store it and centralize it in a single system. So with this single system being the academic rating index, which, as I did earlier on say, it began off as a rating tool where we're just basically rating um, the supervisor and how they are performing and what is the student's out view of how the relationship basically looks like. So on the backdrop of what I had earlier described, colleagues, is that in South Africa we currently have 26 public universities, and of those 26 universities, they can only accommodate 18% of students, of matriculants. So, and the studies have shown that by the first year, 60% of those students drop out. And for their undergraduate programs, we find that there is a 22% completion within their third year, and then a 39% completion within their fourth year. So more often than not, most students would basically fail and then add an extra year to their academia. And then on the postgraduate side, we saw that um, the dropout rates for masters in their first year and second year are 35% and 21%, respectively. So, and for the doctoral level, the dropout rate on both first year and second year sits around about 70%. What that basically taught us is that we have an 80% completion rate for master students and a 26% completion rate for PhD or doctoral students. So once we began to look at the numbers and studies, we realized that this is basically a multifaceted issue that is basically costing the government a lot of money. And for us to be able to draw down what could be the issue, so it's essentially the challenge basically links to various things such as financial loss, resource allocation to universities, as well as the academic reputation of universities becomes at stake. So the retention efforts that the universities put in place to be able to keep these students are basically thwarted because of the high dropout rates and the impact on the graduation rates, which basically lowers the overall graduation rate. And above all things, which is the one at the end here, so the loss of intellectual capability. So that intellectual capital basically gets lost, with students dropping out either due to various challenges that could basically lead to them dropping off. So there's quite a number of challenges that we also saw, but in the interest of time, I will try not to cover them. But so part of the research problems that we saw while we were trying to do our studies was that the relationship itself was a key problem. So our research problems was classified into three subsections. So the first one basically targeting the relationship challenge. So that basically talks about the impact, the progress, and the dynamics within the relationship. So key factors such as oversight and in terms of monitoring tools, and then communication expectations, as well as establishing clear boundaries, and as well as being able to articulate the expectations from both the student and the supervisor. Those came out basically as part of the biggest red flags that we saw from a relationship perspective. So another key one that we also saw while we were doing our studies is that there is a bigger, in South Africa, we have over 11 official languages. So, and we have what you would call it, a cultural rainbow in a sense. So, cultural diversity and considerations play, and backgrounds rather, play quite a big role in how people perceive the world and the worldview that each and every individual has. So stuff of that nature basically boils down to becoming strenuous on a relationship, because people are raised from different backgrounds and different personalities. So when it comes to academia, you would find that it comes also across is one of the biggest factors that put a strain on the relationship of a student and their supervisor. One thing also that I need to mention is also the power dynamics. So what our studies also revealed was that the power dynamics in terms of the hierarchical dyad also proved to be quite strenuous on the relationship. So that the supervisor is the boss and the student is the subordinate. So with that hierarchy, sometimes there would be lack of trust, and then the relationship basically becomes strained, and then which basically ultimately leads to the high dropout rate. So the second key portion of what the academic rating index basically tries to solve is the problem of inadequate supervision systems. In the light of this, what we realized is that we have quite a limited understanding of available supervision systems. But what we do have in place is general quality systems, like stuff such as your H index, your item index, the citation across all the corpuses, whatever the case may be. So what we saw is that specifically for post for postgraduate for postgraduate supervision, there is limited tools that basically are available for us to use on an overarching on an overarching layer to be able to understand how the relationship between the student and their supervisor really is. So that was the second problem that we basically encountered. So having limited access to such resources, and as well as having inefficient communication channels, and limited accountability and oversight. So not having students or not having systems of this nature proved to be quite strenuous on the relationship, because there is no feedback loop, which is one of the very critical things that we saw to be missing across our studies. And then thirdly is not having a more unified. So across the all 26 universities, we saw that there is no unified or consistent application framework to be used to measure the relationship between a postgraduate student and their supervisor, or the mentor-mentee relationship. So there is no adequate or standardized way. So each university or institution of higher learning would have their own framework that basically that they would use. But then what that would do is basically there would be a variation in the expectation, so that different supervisors may interpret and apply the framework differently, leading to inconsistent expectations for the students. And because of the various frameworks that are being used around, so there is an uneven enforcement. Some supervisors may adhere strictly to the framework, while others may be quite lenient because so what that would do would basically show the lack of standardization across the 26 universities. So it was quite inconsistent in terms of a framework that can be used across the board to be able to accommodate or to derive sentiment between the student and the supervisor on a. I'm just gonna go next. Was clearly defined because the academic rating index is already out there to the world and is currently being used. What we wanted to understand is basically the following. We wanted to evaluate the experiences, the successes, the fulfillments of the academic journey in a sense, but by using the same model for everyone. So how can we essentially evaluate the applicability and the effects of the academic rating index in the real world? how then do we quantify that this proposal or this particular artifact or system that we have produced is essentially applicable and it has an effect on the academic journey. So that is our first objective, which basically tries to say we want to understand the student satisfaction index based on the evaluation of this particular system that we've put in place, and how effective is it? What is its impact? Does it help eradicate the inconsistencies that our that our problem number 3 basically was trying to like understand? Does it address the issue in the real world? The second portion of it is so that we wanted to analyze the data on the supervisor's activities and student progress. So how then can we create a robust data analytics system and a reporting component? How can we go about to ensure that the information that we have in our system, or rather the data that we have in our systems, becomes information that is organized and that basically makes sense to the end user and to the institution or to whoever is reading the information, to be able to derive sentiment and unveil insights and transforming education with informed decision making for a brighter future. As we all know that colleagues, information is key. So like they always say, whosoever has data is king. So with the data that we have, we are trying to basically derive intelligence out of it to address the second question basically in our study. To say then, how can we have data-driven insights by capturing and analyzing data of the supervisor's activities and the students' progress into a centralized platform that can provide valuable insights, trends, patterns, and areas of improvement, most especially from a supervisor's perspective. And the administration can also use that data for the improvement of its colleagues and or rather its employees, which is supervisors in this case. The third objective essentially was that we ought to develop a centralized platform because there is no standardization. So this system, this data collection tooling mechanism ought to be centralized where everything is streamlined and there is increased transparency and there's continuous integration with various academic sites as well. So what this would basically allow us to do is that we would have all the data in a single place. Obviously, we'll have to source it at some point, but it would be a view once. So once a student or supervisor logs into their profile, they would have all the data sourced from various data sources and essentially exist in one data place so that we can have a much more informed decision. So what would the typical data basically look like? The expertise of a supervisor, their academic journey, their history, what they have published, where they have published, with whom they have published, under which titles, so and what their interests are, and then who have they supervised, and how was that relationship, and then we derive out of that information, rather out of that data, valuable insights that essentially allow us to ensure that this thing is centralized and it's basically much more creative, and it basically serves as a smart tool for an impact, or rather a lasting impact upon our education. And then let's just quickly go here. I will not basically dive deep into the other research questions, but essentially what I want to talk about is the one that is in the middle, because this is part of a PhD thesis, so I'll just choose a subsection of it. How can we integrate the existing and established academic system to incorporate search engine capabilities is the title of today, essentially. How then can you have a unified search engine out of this particular tool that we have? Essentially, what it does, as I did allude earlier on, It's currently working as a rating tool where students come in and they rate their supervisors using what we refer to as the 7 C's framework, uh, which is basically 7 C's, such as how does the supervisor perform based on their care. There's quite a number of them. I think there's 7 in total. So there's quite a number of categories in total. How does the supervisor perform upon those things? So with that current system that exists, we are basically extending it so that we can be able to derive extra information that will allow us to help the universities to make a much more informed decision by sourcing the data from various places into one singular database. So what's basically happening for our research approach, we essentially chose the sequential explanatory, which is basically a mixed technique, and it's best suited for the study, or it allows for the collection of numerically driven data from postgraduate students to be enrolled essentially. So we'll essentially get the data first. We'll start rather with the quantitative methods. Then we go over to the qualitative one, and then at the far end we then interpret the data. So we'll go fetch the data and then analyze it, and then at the end make sense of it. So the goal is to essentially take this rating tool and create what we refer to as a learning analytics platform. So which essentially is a process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data related to learners and their context to understand how we can optimize their learning experience. So essentially, we want to build a smart system that encompasses the collection of that data into a single place, interpreting it, and then out of it, we derive knowledge. So the key concept is that we want to build a learning analytics platform, and not just an app, but a platform. How would that basically look like on paper? So as you could see here in the diagram, we want to understand how we can help the students perform better, and so that we can have a higher research output or a higher graduation rates or graduation ratio, as unlike what we currently have in our country at the moment. What would that look like? On paper, we can see that we will have access to various sources: the student information system, the learning management system, the content relational management system, and other various sources. And then what would that data do is it basically be streamlined into a channel that basically derives engagement, activities, behavior, financial, academia, as well as demographics. And then out of it, we then build what we refer to as a student impact data model, which basically spews out the following: the trends, the performance, the predictive analytics, and the decision support. So with such things, we would then be able to have what we refer to as more targeted learning, because like one person says, it's a difficult thing to judge a cat by its ability to bark. So we all know that cats don't bark. So if we have a one size fit all, like we currently have in the current structure of the world, which is a one size fit all academic model, so some people will obviously be left behind. So even though it has been refined over the years, but it would be great if, I suppose, we had a much more targeted learning experience, that each student learns differently. And once we have the student impact model essentially modeled and basically stored up somewhere, we will then be able to have much more informed decisions as to how we can basically assist the student to perform better. And then I'm just going to go to the next slide here, just to basically explain how that thing would basically go. So in the event of the one singular data flow source, which is in this case an LMS, we would basically go and collect the data, anonymize it so that we in South Africa we are compliant to POPIA, and I think the GDPRC. I just forgot the names, but there's quite a number of legislative policies that exist in our country to ensure that we can um, uh, it's not dehumanize, but we can obfuscate personal information of people so that the data does not point to a certain individual. So stuff of that nature where we anonymize it and we can have a much more unbiased approach to how we teach our model to work. We would have to go and collect it first, and then after having collected the data, it basically gets stored in our lake, and then it will be indexed so that it can be accessible at high rapid rates. And then obviously we go and fetch the student supervisor records, the same thing, we analyze it, we would essentially have predictive recommendations as well as the dashboards and a feedback mechanism so that at the end you want to know that which we have spewed out, is it correct or not? And then we start the process all over again so that and it's a continuous never ending loop that goes forever and ever. So on the journey to us building the platform, also I forgot to mention that I am a software engineer by trade. I have been in the field for over 10 years, a decade now. I think I'm on 11, if not 13 years of working in the private sector across banking and all these other things. So in the attempt to build the learning analytics system, so what you're currently seeing on your screen right now is basically a legend that shows us how far we are. The student mechanism is still in place, still work in progress. We're still developing it. The engine as well as the business analytics, as per the current studies research objective stipulates. The content in green has been finalized and is currently deployed, and it's workable, and it's also being tested by students and other PhD students who are researching a separate function within the particular system that we have developed. So we are able to do algorithmic computations. We are quite heavy on natural language processing and deriving sentiment out of it. So yeah, so quite a number of modules have been met, but all the ones in red are still not yet available. Such stuff such as your early warning systems to basically identify which students are at risk, so we can start to ring the alarm bells and alert the university to say there is a possibility that student A could fail this semester or could not perform well this semester due to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then at the bottom here, which is also quite critical, personalized learning path that I did try to speak about earlier on, which is adaptive learning. So that is something that is also in the pipeline that we would love to basically incorporate into the system so that have targeted learning that is structured to each and every student's way of learning or learning paths or habits. So currently what we are now seeing is a much more detailed um, architecture of the system. So it's a full architecture and design of the system. On paper, we wanted to do a microservice architecture, but due to time constraints, it just became a monolith. But essentially, most of these components have been developed but you will see later on that we do make use of stuff such as solar caching mechanisms, and the application has been deployed to various sites. Apologies for the sound outside, it's raining. Let's go next. Cool. So then now we then come to saying how can we integrate the academic rating index with the various sites so that we can source the data or the information of the supervisors from the various places. We then tabled an execution strategy that basically says first, we have to source the data. Two, we have to manage the data into a master record. And three, we have to create a mechanism of exposing the data for it to be searchable and to be retrievable in a much more clean fashion. So, and then how we got about doing that is that we began to study the various ways or mechanisms within which we can source data, which is the first part. Stuff such as web scraping, API sourcing basically exist. So web scraping, as the colleagues would know, is basically just opening a website and just scraping the information that's there and in text form, and then storing it in a DB, and then at a later stage be able to analyze it somehow for one to be able to make sense of it. API sourcing, so this application interface, application programming interface that one can basically call, and it can allow us to communicate with them and we source the data out of it. Most of them are paid because we are students. Sometimes having to pay for those APIs can become quite tricky. But we did explore some APIs that allowed us to source some information. I think one of them is perish or something, perish or publish or perish. So we will basically make use of their APIs as well to be able to source the data. But in this case, then we wanted to source the data using the process of ETL, where we designed our very own or developed our own ETL process that essentially does the following. It does web scraping, it does API sourcing to fetch the data from various places, and then it basically cleans it out and then puts it into in a format that we want it to look like or to be classified as. And then the second portion of it basically speaks to master data management, which is essentially is that how then do we go about to ensuring that the data that we have on our system is what we refer to as the golden data or clean data. Various strategies and mechanisms basically exist, but what we opted to go through with our study is the one called consolidation, as you could see, the one that is in red. And the figures below here indicate how the data flows. For instance, let me just start with the first one. The one that is much more federated, we can see that there is a bidirectional communication or bidirectional flow of data. That simply means if data has been updated in one place, it must also be updated in other places. But that for us seems to be quite strenuous. So what's the best one that we thought wanted to, because we want to work as a centralized system, following the consolidation approach serves best for what we are trying to do, because us would be the guy here in the middle in orange, and we would be sourcing from various places and we putting it here. But we will not be updating their data. We just get their data, and if it's already existing, we will just update or add the records depending on the type of data that it is. So with the consolidation, so essentially it's just to combine data from various sources into a hub to make a golden record. So which is what we are trying to establish with the learning platform. For the purpose of exposing the data or having a search capabilities, we use from a full text search basis. We ended up using Apache Solr, which is basically it's running on top of Apache Lucene, and it basically offers document indexing and it's open source. So that's why we went to it instead of Elasticsearch. So our application has an interface that basically exposes the searching using Apache Solr. And then Elasticsearch we could have worked it, but at some point we have to pay. So, and we are still studying, so it became quite of a mission to follow as well as Swan as well. So we went for a much more affordable or practical means, which is in this case is Apache Solr. In the diagram that we are currently seeing here is how the data flows from ETL and data management perspective. So a supervisor would basically set application, So the feature that is currently being developed is the one that will basically go and source the data. So as a supervisor, I would put stuff such as my details, my name and my surname, and then we would do a broadcast search to the various sites and to the various academic sites such as Google Scholar, uh, Semantic Scholar, ResearchGate, and all these other ones. We just basically go to the various sites and then we just scrape the data that we could basically find. So data would go and our ETL process would basically go to the various sites and then put it in our collector and then basically starts to process it, transform it, remove duplications and analyze it and then remove duplications. Once we have reached the clean record, we then store the data into an MDM, which then gets indexed into Solar. And then when the students on the outside are trying to search, so they will be speaking directly to Solar, so they will have access to much more faster and indexed documents or indexed data relating to their supervisors or academic personnel. And then, so the platform adoption is currently the adoption and the testing thereof has been piloted in quite a number of universities in the land. University of South Africa, Limpopo, KZN, CPUT, and so these are basically the sentiment that we have received while we are still testing and trying to get engagement and trying to get more data into the application systems from the various universities. So the various universities here are basically in South Africa. We've got three classes of universities. We've got the big boys, we've got the normal universities, and then we've got like the what you call the university, the technicals. So the ones are more comprehensive. It's like my university as well. It's much more comprehensive. It's much more inclusive. And then you've got the top tier ones such as Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and then you've got the technical. So in our study and our data collection, we wanted to get a mixed batch of all the three categories so that we can make sense of how it's performing in different places. Cool. So essentially, what another hiccup that we faced was essentially when we were starting to source the data, is that in some places it would be prohibited, and then some places would be partially allowed. Semantic Scholar being the ones that is partially allowed because their data requires an API key, and then we have to there's like rate limitations to it. We can't hit their APIs more than 5 times in a minute or so. So there's stuff of that nature for them to be able to regulate how we source the information from them as pertaining to supervisors' publications and research interests. However, on Google Scholar, we built a web scraper that basically scrapes all the public accounts because there is no API for Google Scholar. We'll just our scraper just basically opens the site in memory, and then it just basically does a search on its own and it gets the data. It comes back, and then we are able to store it and we are able to display it, and then the students will then be able to see what interest their supervisor has, and then stuff of that nature. In a nutshell, the application is essentially deployed on Google App Store, as well as we also have a web application that is currently under progress. There is a demo site for it, but it's quite buggy, but it's still under progress. And then the survey systems are basically on the app stores, both Android and iOS. So in the interest of time, I know we were given 30 minutes. I wanted to quickly rush across colleagues. That is my last slide. But essentially, that's what we are trying to perform. We're trying to establish with our study. How can we go about and create a unified platform where essentially student supervisors data can become centralized. It can exist in a centralized place. So if, as a student, I want to have a supervisor with particular interest, I can go into the platform, search for my particular interest, and then return a list of supervisors who have matching qualities and interests. So another thing that we've also put into the place is algorithmic matching, where based on my interests and my supervisor's interest, there is like in a Tinder form of some sort, not particularly Tinder, maybe that could be a wrong example, but we can then be able to source which supervisor and students could potentially match based on their preference of academia, interest, and stuff of that nature. So essentially, in an attempt to increase our research output as well as our graduation rates, our output rates for universities, we found that this study will basically help our country, South Africa in this case, to be able to reach that goal. So thank you, colleagues. I will think I can stop here and then open the floor for questions.